Well, we're live, so you can upload whatever makes you cheery. I want you to be happy. Hey, welcome to our fine feature show. Today we're going to talk about time travel. We're gonna go back in past, and this is a story that Kerry developed, and it was a lot of fun, a lot of excitement, and it took me to a place that I lived for a year before. Welcome to another fine episode of Play for Time. I'm your host, Chris Brogan, and Kerry Gorgone. Kerry, this is another one edited by our man Darren Gorgone. One thing that is slightly different is, boy, did we take a lot of B-roll. What was the editing process like, even before we explain what we're going to talk about today? This was a lot. How did Dan sift his way through it? Do you know?
Nope. No. He's here, though. We could probably ask him in the comments to tell us. Also, your mom is here. So, yeah, we took a ton of footage. There was a comment from you in the past week that we didn't have a lot of B-roll, or that Dan hadn't used all the B-roll. He had, in fact, used all the B-roll we had. So now when I shoot, I'm like, I'm going to shoot this, I'm going to shoot that, I'm going to shoot that thing over there, I'm going to shoot this up here, this down there. And then when I script it later, I try to remember what I got so we can show it at appropriate times. So that's like how I set it up. Dan would have to explain to you how he manages to sift through it. One thing I have seen Dan do is that he'll kind of figure out right away if any of the clips are someone speaking, or if they're B-roll. And if they're B-roll, meaning like secondary stuff that you show while somebody else is talking, he just drops the sound on it right away. Makes it really easy for him to tell the difference between those clips, like the primary ones that he's going to want to emphasize and showcase, and the other ones that are like everything else.
I was on a different screen. Hi, Leslie. Hi, Dad. What a team. Yeah. So in processing, I learned so much from Dan, even when I watch his stuff after the fact. There's some of it I'll never do just because I'm too lazy. And there's some of it that he's just like so much better. But I learn every time because he makes some really incredible edits. And it's a very, very different experience when you have really good editing like this. But there's nothing to edit if there's no story. So we go out and search the stories, and you and I, months ago, very many months ago, I dragged you over to Lowell, Mass, because it's one of those places where I've lived. And I said, hey, let's check it out. There's some really cool mill stuff. I always love mill buildings. So as we were walking around, you saw a little plaque that mentioned the Lowell Mill Girls. And that's pretty much the seed of this story, right?
I normally don't like plaques, but I've discovered, not like I don't like them or have some kind of weird triggering effect. I'm like, that's not that interesting. I like to see the thing that used to be there. So what was interesting about this plaque is that it was on a building in Lowell that is still there, that housed some of the Lowell Mill Girls. And I was, of course, like, what? I love women's history, and that sounds like catnip to me. So I thought I better go check this out. And I chased it down. I asked ChatGPT to tell me a little bit about the Mill Girls, went and validated some of the story points. And then I asked, where should I go? I asked ChatGPT, tell me where to go to see things related to the Mill Girls and their stories. So it surfaced a bunch of cool stuff. The mills themselves, of course, some of which have been turned into a museum. The boarding houses where they used to live, also some of which we are fortunate have been turned into a museum, and a couple of other secondary locations that still look like more or less the way they did at the time. We've had a little comment from editor Dan Gorgone. Some stories focus on the visuals, others rely on the narration to share facts, info, etc. Right? So like if we're on site and we do an intro, outro, that sort of thing, then, we'll use that primarily. We won't do narration as a rule. We'll just show you what we're talking about as B-roll. But in this case, it was like all B-roll, I realized. So there you go. B-roll with narration is how we did it this time. So thanks to Dan Gorgone for that.
So we'll roll it through, and then and it's interesting because, like you said, it's a story about women, it's about empowerment, it's about immigration, and the story of the new world. We've got all that to cover, and then I think what we'll do is we'll talk just a little bit about more about producing a show like this because it's been fun. It's quite a learning experience. So this one's about the Mill Girls of Lowell, Massachusetts.
In 1823, the first textile mills in Lowell, Massachusetts came to life, and with them, a new kind of worker stepped forward, the mill girl. Young, unmarried, often 15, maybe 20, they left behind farm fields and family kitchens for factory bells and boarding house rules. They came for something more. The founders of Lowell weren't just building a factory town, they were designing an experiment. They recruited daughters of New England farm families with a promise: good wages, clean boarding houses, moral supervision. For the mill girls, it was a chance to help their families or gain a little independence of their own. In their letters, they wrote of excitement, of factory work that felt fast, modern, new, of friendships formed in crowded rooms where they read, studied, and sewed by candlelight. Harriet Robinson remembered it as a village where young women met and lived together. The days started early. The work was relentless, 11 hours at a time with bells marking the rhythm of their lives. But in those long days, these girls gained more than wages. They gained a voice. In the evenings, they wrote essays, read books, published the Lowell Offering, a literary magazine written by mill girls for mill girls. They formed debating societies, they talked politics, poetry, and purpose, and when conditions turned, they didn't just complain. They organized. As profits soared, mill owners raised rents and cut pay. By the 1830s, the girls had had enough. They staged some of the first organized strikes by women in the U.S., and they called them turnouts. Sarah Bagley, mill worker turned labor leader, put it plainly: the whip that brings us to Lowell is necessity. Is this freedom? To my mind, it is slavery. These weren't passive girls working quietly in the background. They were activists, they were writers, they were fierce, and they changed the conversation about women, work, and rights in America. By the mid-1840s, that original workforce began to shift. The Irish potato famine brought a wave of immigrants, many of whom arrived in Lowell seeking work. Gradually, immigrant women, particularly Irish, began to take up more positions in the mills. By the mid-1850s, the mill girl was no longer just a Yankee farm daughter, but a reflection of the global forces reshaping the city. They still worked long hours, they still sent wages home, but the makeup of the mill workforce and the story of Lowell itself had begun to change. And yet the legacy of the early mill girls endured. They had carved out something bigger than a paycheck. They saved their wages at Lowell Savings Bank, the Mill Girls Bank. They carried trunks from job to job, like Eliza Adams, chasing work and sometimes freedom. And they left behind more than thread. They left behind a legacy of autonomy, advocacy, and ambition, because these girls didn't just weave fabric. They wove the first strands of a new kind of American story, one where working women had a voice and knew how to use it.
So I think it's fascinating, the experience. We learned a lot of things. Obviously, we got a chance to talk to the United States Park Rangers, who runs that location. And one of the things that I found quite interesting was that this particular mill we were in, the boot mills, they were a full system mill. So they came all the way from cotton being processed into the actual fibers, into carding, into weaving, into production. So it is crazy that it all kind of went together. What did you take out of the experience?
Oh my gosh, so much. So it's one thing to think that you understand, okay, people worked in mills, and to see old mill buildings like the one you live in, that have been like repurposed into living space and be like, cool, yeah, I get the vibe. It's a whole other experience to see it set up the way it would have been for these women who showed up from farms. In the beginning, they were mostly New England farms. Later, they came from Ireland, England, all around to start a completely different life. And they are crammed in like shoulder to shoulder with a machine per person in the beginning, just sweating unbelievably, I imagine, in these rooms. And there's fibers from the cotton in the air. They're breathing that stuff all day. Like, it had to have been crazy. 11 hours a day crammed in there. Over the years, the machines got more sophisticated. And so you'd see, one person could run maybe 3 of them because some things were automated. And then eventually they got to the point where one woman could run with like 20, I think they said. But in the beginning, when they first got there, squashed. So seeing it was really affecting for me. How about you?
All that. But again, one of the things that I made note of is that my grandmother worked most of her life in a paper mill. And it was interesting to note that even as far as the 1970s, the 1980s, up until her retirement, a lot of what they were talking about there. I mean, my Grammy didn't live like in a building with a bunch of girls. She was married. But like the process and the living by the clocks and all that kind of thing, that persisted. And that's the other thing to think about a lot, is that we think of mills as like some very old timey thing. And I live in a mill building. This building did similar stuff. It was a textile mill building. And like, we act like it just wasn't such a, it's such a far away thing. But the experience is one that's alive and well in lots of parts of the world. And I think that's fascinating. The other detail that stuck with me too was just the social element in like a pretty long workday. You covered it. What were the hours? Is like 11 or 12 hours. Like, how is that set up again?
11 hours a day. I want to say the first bell was like 5:30 in the morning. So 11 hours a day, 6 days a week. Sundays were for worship, and you better show up for church or somebody was going to notice. So there was all of that. But there were also lectures that they could attend in town. They started the Offering, the Lowell Offering, which was a newspaper that they wrote and circulated, and did a lot of things. I was like, I don't know how they had the energy for that stuff, but they wrote home. They took action in the communities based on the working conditions and stuff. And it was hard to encompass in a short segment, but some of the women were like, hey man, like, we're happy to have some level of independence, and yet it would be better if working conditions could be improved a little bit. And the men were basically like, you don't like it, leave. And so the women really found the mettle to step forward and say, no, we are here because we need to be here. It is not optional for women to work. We have to work. We have families to support. A lot of them were sending money home. Maybe their brothers were in school, or maybe their sisters wanted to stay in school, or something. So anyway, they all had reasons for being there, and they refused to be kind of set aside as, well, women don't really need to work anyway. And so however they managed to do it after 11 hours on their feet in a textile mill, they managed to do it. They changed things.
One of the places where we get some of our footage in the boarding house area was run by another U.S. park ranger. The rest of that same building had other exhibits. They had other like little things you could walk through. One was talking about sort of like immigration timelines and all that. And I found that fascinating. And what I liked was that Lowell, for instance, and very many other places have sort of like wave of immigration type stories. Lowell, for instance, a lot more contemporary to me in the 1980s, 90s, had a massive wave of Vietnamese immigrants. There are since several others from various African nations. And I think that's also interesting, the way that these different cultures come and kind of make a place their own, just like when we covered the Point last week. And that was, used to be a lot of French people. There was now a lot more Dominican people, et cetera. So it's fascinating to me how that's come about. Annette says, by the way, I'm curious about my grandmother's history working in a garment factory in the Midwest. My grandmother's one of the most independent-minded women in my growing up years. I need to ask my family for the recollections. Do you have any family in the mill backgrounds anywhere in your line?
I couldn't tell you completely, but so on my dad's side, there was some folks with money, not obviously my immediate family, but like up the line a little bit. We had somebody marry into like the Boston Sand and Gravel, whatever, family and stuff like that. I don't know what happened to that gravel money. I didn't get it. That's all I know. So I don't know about that. I know my mom's mother had like 9 kids in that family, like 9 people in her family. So I had a lot of cousins and aunts and uncles I will never know. They were not mill workers either. My mom's mom was a telephone operator for a time. And my grandfather on that side was, it said, I think, a poulterer. So, like, chickens, basically, from when he was in Ireland. I don't know what he did when he got here. But nope, no mills for me.
Like I said, my Grammy was involved. My Gramps did a tiny bit of work in mills. Briefly, I think he was kind of in between jobs a couple times and went and did some work in mills. They're very popular in Augusta, Maine. There was, big paper mills because there was all that pine wood just waiting to be used and handled. It's interesting too, other countries. I mean, I've been to Doncaster's area where they have a lot of mills. I was in Manchester a couple months ago with my oldest kid, and it's just fascinating to me how all that comes about. And from mills to media, here we are, just 2 goofs with cameras walking around covering this sort of a thing. It's fun. It's fun that we can put together a story and sort of emulate processes, sort of like what they do on shows like Chronicle and that sort of a thing, which is a New England area show, wherein which we're assembling stuff the way you assemble stuff in a mill. You take your raw product of media that comes from story design, and you then turn it into a piece that you hope people pay attention to. It's noteworthy that Leslie says it's sad that mills are no longer around this area. I mean, they're pretty grueling jobs for very low pay. So it's not like they seemed like they fed an area pretty well, but what they did was they kept them at kind of like subsistence level poverty in some ways. So it's kind of tricky. The economics of mills are a little challenging. But where I was going with the media thing, I was going to say that in some ways, there's going to be people who are raised in kind of a different kind of mill, which will be like, for instance, editing mills. There are people you and I both know who do video editing for YouTubers and all that. And there's a lot of stuff going on there. So I see we might have another guest in the wings. Talk to me, Kerry.
Say his name and he shall appear. One Dan Gorgone has come to tell us about editing the Play for Time segments. Now, we've had some different types of segments, some of which you've been featured in and that were really like a bit of silly fun. And then some like this week's, which are like a semi-serious, poignant story. So do you approach those differently, or do you just dive in and see where it takes you?
I appreciate everything that you guys bring to me when you go out on your adventures, and it's always some kind of place that I hadn't anticipated. So it's really funny to learn about what is around the our area, especially Massachusetts. Massachusetts is so rich with history and so many different stories. But the Mill Girls is a very interesting story to edit, and the approach was really, I think, like Kerry, like you mentioned, it started with your narration, with your story, because there's a lot of information there. There's a lot of facts and setup there. And what it kind of reminds me of is, like, I think for a lot of us, when we go to like different museums, which are not like science museums or certain history museums, you can kind of like, there's different sections that you can go to. Like, you can learn about this or learn about that, or a very specific kind of thing. The Mill Girls is a very specific thing. And so what you did there is you provided the architecture, the structure. And so all the B-roll, all the different shots, all those things helps to set the stage, give people a feel of like what's there. All I'm doing is kind of like putting the pieces in place for the story that you provided. Other times, it's been completely like, I remember like the Montreal a winter event where we went and we were just kind of like wandering around seeing what's there. That's certainly a fun one to kind of figure out. And that's just like, well, we'll lay down a music track and just kind of see what happens and see where it takes us. and that's kind of how you would experience a fair, right? It's just like, let's see where it takes us. There's no real story. Sometimes you get little tidbits of things and stuff, but it's more about vibes.
When you come with us, we get a different, because I have what I'm interested in and I have my level of camera ability, which is less than your level of camera ability. I'm working on it. I'm working on it. But when I come home, sometimes there'll be stuff that I've gotten, and you'll be like, oh, I wish we just had like a
Mm.
static shot of that, or I wish we just got one more shot of this. And so I feel like when we all go, it changes kind of the vibe of the whole excursion. So not like better or worse. Obviously, it's a lot of fun, but I mean like the piece comes out differently. So maybe what was going to be like a more serious bit, like I just did, would be a little more fun because you would have some ideas or thoughts. I don't know. I guess you should come more.
You know, it's hard because um, I enjoy the challenge of editing, especially when it's a place where I haven't been, and so it's like you guys bring things to me. It's like, here it is. Like, can we have a segment? And so I get kind of free reign to pick, like, oh, we'll put a hip hop track in the background, and it's about, I don't know, the local nuns cooking for the for the people, or there was another one too where it was the Montreal City walk, the art walk, and I picked a very like serene, very very chill kind of music track, and this is all the stuff from Epidemic Sound, which is their library is incredible. It's just amazing. So all these tracks come from there, and you can kind of you can definitely set a tone for it, but I do think oftentimes the what you guys capture sort of speaks to me and says like, yeah, this feels like it's going to be a fun thing, or it feels like if we added some energetic type of music to it, then the energy of the place would come out. Other times it is a more serious story. Um, or like, when we went to the museum in, was it Salem, and there was the exhibit about
Peabody Essex Museum.
the
Yeah.
Peabody Essex Museum. That's what it
Hmm.
was. That was an opportunity to use like a really funky kind of mysterious spooky track, and that fit with the vibe. So
I doubt people realize like how little we leave the house normally. So this has been like a significant lifestyle change for us, for like all
I
of
will
us.
say, it's like, I mean, I know that you hear feedback from me about like what you bring home, like the types of shots and the things, and very often like my feedback is only like it's only like one vision. I mean, there's so many different ways to tell all these stories that you guys pick. So, the Mill Girls could have certainly been produced like, like a 70s sitcom with a laugh track, or it could have been like a terrible, dramatic tragedy or some kind of thing, or it could have been like a League of Their Own, something that's fun and uplifting, but also heartfelt. Like, so there's all kinds of different ways that you can present these things, and I think what we've tried to do here is approach pretty straightforward, but have a little fun with it, and show what our perspective of it is. When you guys go out with the cameras and you capture the things that are important to you and are noteworthy to you, and I just try to piece it together uh, and make it kind of cool.
So coming at everybody next week will be another trip into the past because we have lots and lots and lots and lots of B-roll from Old Sturbridge Village, which is a living history museum in Massachusetts, where every day is in 1838. Like they had to pick it. They were like, look, I know we span, but let's pick a date, you guys. So like we all say the same stuff about who's president and everything. So it's pretty cool. I had a couple totally raw clips. You get a little sneaky peeky into them if you want to check them out. Brogan, you want to play them? chickens.
All right, here you have a town meeting going on here.
You know, Brogan would be where the chicks are.
Always hanging out with the hot chicks. That's me. And then this fine piece of work, we're going to listen to some metal.
Listen to some metal.
Clang.
Yeah, I know. Extra fun fact, my microphone wasn't working. So
So we recorded a lot of video, but zero audio. But that was a day. So I want to talk about that day because this was crazy. So the 19th of April of this year was the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Lexington, the first battle of what would become the American Revolution. And so the 250th. So this was going to be epic. And this reenactment starts at 5:15 a.m. So I say to Kerry, this is nuts. She goes, okay, cool. And we get in the car at 4-something a.m. Dan's like still quite in the middle of his night. 4-something a.m. We haul down the highway, cannot get in. And in the process, we drive all around Lexington, cannot find a place to park, cannot figure it out. It turns out there's systems and ways and methods we did not know. Fine. We go, let's go to Concord. It's just down the street. We've got lots of time to set up. We're gonna miss this battle. It's only gonna be the 250th. Once we go to Concord, over 1,200 police are blocking every way into the city. Didn't know that either. Didn't know there were setups for buses. Kerry goes, well, I've never been to Old Sturbridge Village. Let's go there. So we drive another hour or something down the road and head there. So the fact that the camera doesn't work, if that's the only sin committed out of all those experiences for starting a bleary-eyed trip at 4 a.m., I think we did okay.
I'll tell you what, too. We were pretty tired. That is true. But we were going to learn some history, and it ended up being delightful because it was like every other history nerd in Massachusetts had like descended on Lexington and Concord. It was literally like 100,000 people, which, I don't super hang with crowds. I don't know if you know me, but now you do. We went to Old Sturbridge Village. We were there so freaking early. There was nobody. And then like people trickled in or whatever. So we had the place almost to ourselves for a while. And we were just having these fun conversations with the living history, the costumed historians and stuff. And we did in fact get to see some Minutemen. So we did, because it was the actual day of the Battle of Lexington. They had a couple of folks there. There was like one little anachronistic barn where they had stuff from that period of time, the Revolutionary War. So I thought it was a super cool day. I have no regrets, except that my mic got jostled.
So that's on the docket for next week. So we're doing time travel 2 weeks in a row. First time we go to Lowell Mills, we do some history there. We're going out to Sturbridge Village in Massachusetts and seeing what happens in 1838.
Also, the boiled dinner that the Mill Girls had, like they had on display in the Mill Girls Boarding House Museum, both Chris and I were like, woof, that looks good. Like we wanted to sit down and have dinner.
That's dinner my mom and dad and grandparents made for me many times over my childhood growing up. So it was nothing I hadn't seen. So look, I know you got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. Speaking of things edited by Darren Gorgone, I'm playing this one more time before we finish the month of April.
Dang, we're going, everybody.
Any opportunity to get Mr. T on the show.